microphone, because these are very sort of directional. And also, if you've got a mobile phone, can you put it on silent or turn it off, please? Apologies, Kate, we're all here today, aren't we? Declarations of interest? Any colleagues got a declaration of interest? If something crops up you feel you should have done, well, let me know. Minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of February, can I sign those as a true record? Agreed. Everyone's agreed, thank you. Public participation, we've got one question and 3 statements. So I'll take the question from Mike Hall first, please.
Mr. Chair, my name is Mike Hall, owner of Silton Mews. On the 12th of January, out of the blue, Silton Parish Meeting was notified of a provisional area tree preservation order relating to Silton Mews. By way of background, we have been in dialogue with Dorset Planning for almost 2 years with regards to extending our property, for which planning permission has now been granted. At no point in this process has the tree team or case officer raised any concern for a TPO until the 11th hour. This TPO has come as a complete shock to us and has caused alarm in the parish of Silton too. An extraordinary parish meeting was held on the 21st of February, where our provisional TPO was agenda item 3. Councillor Belinda Rideout was present for this item, having kindly conducted a full site visit of our garden and application site. It is important to note that no trees in our garden are at risk or will be impacted by the extension or parking. We value our trees. We planted 27 trees to date, and we've been instrumental in planting 3 English oaks in the village to honour our late Queen's Green Canopy initiative. We were taken aback to receive an area TPO, particularly because much of the area designated is nowhere near the site application site. There is no logic to a non-specific area TPO that, for example, includes fruit trees and diseased ash tree. Several objections to this area TPO have been lodged, including one by Silton Parish Meeting, the final paragraph of which sums up the prevailing situation. This area TPO will not help the trees at Silton Mews to contribute positively to the amenity of Church Road and the parish of Silton. Indeed, it will do exactly the opposite, as it will impose a completely unnecessary layer of bureaucracy on the management of these trees. This TPO is arbitrary, unjustified, and completely unnecessary. Silton Parish Meeting strongly objects to the imposition of this TPO and requests that it be withdrawn. Our key concerns are the imposition of a TPO order of this nature will be counterproductive, and rather than protecting trees, as news of this area TPO spreads, it is likely to prompt the felling of trees prior to planning applications being submitted. There has been no consultation with us from the tree officer about the area TPO to date. Silton is not in a conservation area or an AONB. There is no other existing TPO in our parish. This TPO will inevitably generate an unnecessary level of bureaucracy for all parties, as it encompasses many trees that require regular tree management and remedial pruning to ensure their optimum health. LPAs have powers to cancel confirmation of TPOs or else vary or revoke them. I request that such an action is taken in respect of the area TPO due to be imposed on our property. We were drawn to Silton Mews for its calm, green space for our health and well-being following a cancer diagnosis in our household. This TPO has put undue stress on us.
Okay, thank you very much. Response from Councillor David Walsh.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Hall, for your question. The answer comes in 4 parts. Firstly, area TPOs are made as a matter of urgency to protect trees of amenity value within defined land. The intention is that the TPO will be modified to cover appropriate individual or groups of trees within the designated area. This will be undertaken in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Secondly, consultation is not undertaken prior to serving a TPO. This is to prevent the removal of unprotected trees prior to a TPO being served. Thirdly, trees within conservation areas are afforded protection, as the local authority must be notified of proposals to carry out tree works. The number of existing TPOs in an area is not a factor taken into consideration when making a TPO. Finally, tree works can be undertaken on trees covered by TPOs. A tree works application needs to be made to Dorset Council, and there is no charge for this. To conclude, Dorset Council is not proposing to confirm the TPO with an area designation, but rather to modify it to cover specific trees and groups of trees considered worthy of protection. This would not include diseased trees referred to in the submission. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Right, we now move on to a statement from Bob Foster, I believe is here.
I'm making a statement in support of agenda item 9, which is the Swanage capital asset transfer. Just to put faces to names, I'm Bob Foster. I chair the Swanage and Purbeck Development Trust. I'm just going to provide a brief overview of the trust and something about our track record. We're a registered charity. We established in 2015 with the objectives of supporting the most needy in the community by protecting and enhancing community services and making sure that the best use was made of community property assets. We achieve these by facilitating the sustainable use of owned property and providing an umbrella charity for small voluntary organisations who share the same objectives as us. Now, during that period, we've now built up 21 local voluntary organisations under that umbrella, and they share the governance and the benefits of the size of organisation, sharing accounting and insurance and other things. And we work as a team in looking for the best outcomes for the community of Swanage and the surrounding villages. Under our Wellbeing Swanage signposting initiative, we also organise and run in Hurstone a toddler group, a successful youth club, a community centre, a community cafe, a community pantry. The objectives of Wellbeing Swanage, which is important to the Trust, is to build resilience in the community and help people help themselves and others. We describe this as a bottom-up approach. Now, we have a sustainable, not-for-profit financial model, which is property-based. We deliver low-cost space for use by service providers and local groups while building a surplus of reserves. The youth centre, which was a previous asset transfer in 2016, is now a thriving 5 days per week childcare nursery employing 26 local people. And employment is important to this all our asset transfers. Another of our owned assets has become a central focus for community activities in the Hurstone area, which is called the Hurstone Village Hall. Both properties produce surplus income over cost while maintaining an affordable cost-based hiring charge. Surpluses generated in this way are reinvested in our charitable projects around the area. Our proposal for Chapel Lane is to integrate the site, attract community service providers to operate in the proposed new health and wellbeing hub. These services will be based upon recognised unmet service needs whilst enhancing and securing existing services. We are working currently, and we're delighted to be working currently, with, in partnership with Children's Services to manage the Swanage Family Hub, which is a whole new initiative. The Trust will also work with Adult Services Commissioning to generate managed activities for adults locally in a friendly, welcoming environment. The planned integration of the buildings that we have on site will provide social benefits of enhancing services, providing intergenerational activities, new local employment, and increased community resilience and support for local people to help themselves and others. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Foster. Right, we now move on to a statement, and I think this is going to be a double act between Tracy Cozy and Giles Watts. So over to you.
Thank you. On behalf of Dorset Climate Action Network, DCAN, we would like to express our strong appreciation and support for Dorset Council's new Natural Environment, Climate and Ecology Strategy, NECES 2023 to 2025 refresh. The document is a positive step with some important improvements, in particular the new emphasis on the ecological emergency and on the topic of adaptation to global warming and climate change. We have been impressed by the professionalism and commitment shown by members and officers of Dorset Council and the NECES refresh, and we applaud other initiatives that Dorset Council is promoting, such as the comprehensive environmental decision-making tool, the 30 by 30 metric, the climate planning policy statement and sustainability checklist, and making the NECES one of the 5 key priorities in the Council plan. Dorset Can is confident that it can support Dorset Council in addressing Dorset's environmental and emissions targets. In particular, we would like to work more closely with Dorset Council to address the 98.5 emissions outside the direct control of the Council. The best way to tackle these longer-term issues is through better engagement, better communication and better cooperation amongst the many organisations in Dorset that share this common goal, and Dorset Can is well placed to help with these efforts.
Dorset Can has a number of its own environmental programmes, such as the Great Big Dorset Hedge initiative to build a stronger network of ecological pathways through our hedgerows, and the Open Green Homes initiative, which is helping people to retrofit their homes with better insulation and live more sustainably. We also support a growing network of local organisations, for example, through the Dorset COP this September, a networking event modelled on the international COPs. This event is organised alongside Zero Carbon Dorset and Sustainable Dorset and will bring together Dorset organisations with international speakers in a locally led event to network, spread good practice and share expertise. We invite Dorset Council to make use of our networking with residents and other local organisations and to make use of our expertise to extend the reach of Council's programmes. In an accompanying letter, we explain how we might enhance the current measures in the Natural Environment, Climate and Ecological Strategy and accelerate the programme. We hope the Dorset Council will consider these suggestions, and we invite Dorset Council to set up a partnership forum in which Dorset Can and other county-wide environmental and climate change organisations can work together to tackle the long-term environmental and emissions challenges that we face together. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you very much, both of you. Right, we move on to questions from members now. Now, those that have just come to speak may wish to leave. You're welcome to stay, but may wish to leave, and I'll just hold the meeting for a moment until you do so. Right, we've got the next item is questions from members, and the first question is from Councillor Paul Kimber.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay? Thank you. Thank you. I'm receiving complaints via my council's surgery regarding the mess on Portland Roads, which is going into homes, especially on cars. This is regarding the stone dust that's messing up the streets and the houses. The horrific state of the Grove Road is where I start. By the way, this is a complaint that was sent to me. There are two. The constant mud, dirt, stones from the new quarry off the Grove Road are attempts to road sweep, and there should be some sort of truck wash for the lorries to leave the quarry entrances at the very least. I must wash, and I believe what his meaning is, I must wash my car 3 times a week, as they are caked in mud where there's damage to the road, where there's heavy loaders cross from one side, then onto the main road to the quarry on the other side of the whole road. The Grove corner and midway up the Grove is dangerous, skiddy when wet due to the mud, dust, etc. Then summer, dry dust everywhere in the garden, on the washing, and the cars left alone on heath dangers and will be impacted our health in the future. I could go on, but things need to change urgently, as this is living on a constant build. It's like living on a constant builder site where no due care for the residents or the environment or natural habitat and wildlife. Please treat this as a priority. A community disaster unfolding before anyone pays any national pays interest. Look forward to your thoughts and responses. Other areas in Easton, homeowners are also facing this mess. From another resident who I've been almost in daily contact with, I live on Portland in your constituency where there's serious problems on the road. There is mess because detritus is caused by quarrying activity, particularly around Easton. Dorset Council say that they are powerless to limit the regulate the quarry activity and are limited because of the 1951 planning consent. This cannot be right in 2023. I should be grateful if you would ascertain whether this aged planning consent can be amended so that the quarry companies act more responsibility and clear up the mess they cause and drive around the island and see for yourself. Some quarrying activity obviously needs to be limited so the whole island does not disappear in the backs of lorries. People should come before profit. This is the questions, two questions from my residents passed on to you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Get a response from Councillor David Walsh.
Thank you, Leader. And can I thank my colleague from Portland for his question? The majority of the quarry sites on Portland were allowed under a 1951 planning permission, which only had 2 conditions, neither of which could be used to enforce against these matters. There has been a particular problem during the intensive quarrying of stone for the deep water berth at Portland Port. The contractor has been working directly with affected residents to resolve their concerns and has been carrying out regular and daily sweeping of the roads, but this has had mixed success, depending on the weather conditions. As these particular quarrying operations have now ceased, the situation should now improve. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, David. Okay, Paul.
Chair, I was hoping for just a little bit more action on the 1951 Act, whether we are able to take this up and write to all MPs or our MP to try and get a question at least. Thank you.
Take that as a supplementary, David. You got a response to that?
No, as I've said, the conditions that were made in 1951, sorry, neither bore any into what's being said.
Right. Moving on, Councillor Kelvin Clayton.
Thank you, Chair. A substantial number of Bridport's housing stock are listed buildings. These are often small and relatively cheap houses inhabited by the working population of the town. However, when many owners have applied for permission to install energy efficiency measures like double glazing, they are often refused on the grounds that such measures will harm the significance of the building. The same reasons have been given to small businesses trying to reduce their energy bills by installing solar PV panels on the roofs. Although the NPPF defines significance as the value of a heritage asset to this and future generations because of their heritage interest, this significance and any harm done to it is in effect the sole judgment of a conservation officer. In her book, Playing with the Past, the former CEO of the Welsh Government's Heritage Service, Kate Clark, writes, "Traditionally, heritage specialists have used their expertise to define the significance of heritage sites, but increasingly, practitioners will need to behave less like dictators and more like facilitators, listening to people, engaging with communities, and helping groups explore what matters rather than telling them." Would it be possible for the guidance note in item 11, outlining the importance of the historic heritage and issues to consider when looking at energy efficiency in listed buildings, to be modified to include a commitment to a programme of community engagement?
Thank you, Kelvin. Get a response from Councillor David Walsh.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Clayton. The aim of the document Listed Buildings, What You Can Do for Climate Change, is to take the approach suggested by Kate Clark, in that it seeks to facilitate the work with applicants. The document outlines what measures can be taken on listed buildings, which do not require listed building consent. Where consent is required, the approach is to look at whether there are other options that could be undertaken to achieve the same aim of the applicant and not conflict with national planning policy. One example of this could be to locate solar panels on modern extensions, sheds or garage roofs as an alternative to siting them on the listed building. With regard to community engagement, a series of planning workshops is planned after Easter, in which representatives from all town and parish councils will be invited. A key part of these will be presentations on the climate change interim guidance and position statement, sustainability checklist, and listed building guidance. Town and parish council representatives will have the opportunity to ask questions regarding the content of the documents. Community engagement forms part of the implementation of the planning commitment to climate change, so it is not proposed to include specific reference to it in the document. Thank you, Chairman.
Wish to come back, Kelvin?
Only to say, Chair, that we possibly have a slightly different vision of what community engagement means. I accept that engaging with town and parish councils is valuable. I was thinking more of an exchange with ordinary members of the community to try and discover what they value. But perhaps we can pick up on this sometime.
Chairman, at item 11, I am recommending to Cabinet that the paper that's being discussed goes out to public consultation for a 6-week consultation after Easter. So I'm hoping that will help all of us discover.
Okay, thank you very much, David. Right, moving on then to agenda item 7, the forward plan. You'll have all colleagues on the Cabinet will have seen the forward plan. I noted one thing, that the one item has got the 28th of March on it for decision. It's actually going to be, and I'm aware from talking to Kate that it's been moved. It's the 25th of April and it's been corrected online. So that's been sorted out already. Anybody got anything else? Or can we accept the document as set out? Agreed? All members of the Cabinet agreed. We move on to agenda item 8 now, which is the capital programme. I'm going to hand over to Gary Suttle.
Good morning, Gary Suttle, portfolio holder for finance. The capital programme, obviously has been in existence for some time, was agreed at the budget in February. However, we've made a refresh based on a number of factors. Firstly, there's been a significant increase in the cost of borrowing, and this will affect both revenue budget and the medium-term financial plan going forward, and therefore it was prudent to look again at what we actually had in there, what the costs were, what the level of borrowing was going to be, and how that would impact longer term. The result of this has been a refreshed capital programme. And in a moment, I'll ask Sean Kramer to do a few short slides, explain what we did, But I'm asking you to accept this as a refresh. And the most important thing about this is actually achievable within our capacity, something that can be done, whereas in the past, perhaps, although these were wonderful aspirations, perhaps were not as realistic as we now believe this current list is. So, well, it's probably all for the best. Actually, strange enough, I noticed we couldn't see David, but you saw me. I don't know if David wants to come back on, then you'll be able to see me, and then, or we could just swap over. Yeah. Oh, right, okay. Okay, well, I'm not going to say it all again. I'm sure your ears weren't affected by the microphone. So I'm going to hand over to Sean now and ask him to produce a few short slides. And Sean.
Thank you for the introduction, and delighted to be here for my first Cabinet. So great to be here to present the capital programme. So we've got a few slides to run through just to kind of call out some of the main detail in the report, and also a few things I think might be asked about at the end. So I'm going to try and preempt a few questions if I can. So next slide, please. Thank you. So the process that we undertook to review the capital programme was kind of a peer review approach. So we had a group of officers that joined together, meeting with the corporate director and then the heads of service or project managers for each of the projects. There are about 190 projects to review, so you can imagine that was a fairly fast-paced and quite a time-consuming exercise, but we made sure we reviewed each project in as much detail as required. The focus of the meetings was around understanding how each of the capital projects aligned to the council plan for 2024, and also the kind of key cabinet commitments. And then also looking at the resources, so that contains officers, contractors, and some of the professional services that go into some of the stuff that happens behind the scenes to deliver on the capital programme. And we were also considering the impact of rising financing costs, as we've seen quite significant increases to interest rates over the last kind of 18 months to 2 years. The output of that work was a refreshed capital programme, which was presented to SLT, then had some informal conversations with cabinet members and portfolio holders, and then kind of culminating in presenting the full report to cabinet, which is what I'm here doing today. Next slide, please. So what was the kind of some of the outputs and the findings of that work? So we're looking again, what was the historic spend, just to understand what we spent in the past, and therefore how does that suggest what we may need to do if we want to increase spend going forwards. We looked at the impact of the medium-term finance plan. So essentially, if we continue delivering at this rate, how does that affect some of our assumptions in the MTFP, and how do we make sure we can finance the capital programme? There's a little bit of a spring clean, so to speak. There was some legacy projects in there. There was a couple of projects which had been superseded by other projects in the capital plan. So again, we've reviewed some of those. And then also had a look at some of the business cases for the projects, which in essence created some headroom in the capital programme by looking at how some of these capital projects can be self-financed. So what's the revenue impact of these projects? How does it impact the MTFP going forwards? And is there a way to self-finance, therefore freeing up some of those financing costs to fund other capital projects, which maybe don't have a kind of return on investment as such, but are a key priority project and need some help to finance. Next slide, please. So the output of the review, so this slide essentially shows the summary of the capital programme that's presented today over 4 years. It shows the total for each financial year. So for 23-24, spending just under £128 million, moving into just under 86, 24-25, and then continuing through the years. It shows how each of the projects is funded. So fully funded refers to things that are funded essentially entirely by grants, Section 106, other kind of external contributions. Partially funded is a blended approach, so we may have match funding or some contribution towards the schemes. And then Dorset Council funded is essentially something that's funded by us borrowing or through capital receipts. So something that we're taking on the full financing costs ourselves for. And you can see that profile over the 4 years. The bottom table then shows how the original kind of capital program that was put forward, what the impact is, how does that impact the MTFP? So what's the gap? What do we need to add in to finance the capital program going forwards? So you can see the line says current program plus all new bids has an impact of adding £800,000 to the budget gap for 24-25, and then an increase across the next few years. This is in line with, again, it mentions in the report, this is in line with the previous prudent approach around what we need to add to the MTFP to deliver a capital program, because each new scheme that you deliver requires new borrowing costs, so therefore it adds to that revenue cost going forwards. So we can then see the cumulative impact of the MTFP, which is for noting today, and we'll come back in October for a formal refresh as we go through the budget setting cycle. Next slide, please. So what happens next? So we're obviously continuing the oversight and assurance on delivery. That obviously remains kind of really crucial. This is setting the plan. The next step is moving into that continued delivery for pre-existing schemes, and then moving into that delivery phase for any of the new and emerging schemes going forwards. Continuing that oversight and assurance around value for money, again, given the kind of rapidly changing cost environment, making sure that the projects still deliver value for money, that we're still looking to achieve the outputs and outcomes of those projects as we go forwards. It's worth noting the capital plans is dynamic, so we'll essentially be refreshing it, revising it and adapting it. With a kind of revenue budget, you tend to set that once and it's that for the year, whereas the capital program is set over multiple years, recognizing that there can be some delays to capital, things can take a bit longer, you can dig into a foundation somewhere and uncover all sorts of challenges, which mean the project can be delayed by a couple of months. So it's definitely a dynamic thing, and therefore we'll keep in contact. The final point around quarterly finance reporting will be the main place to give that refreshed capital program updates on how progress is going each quarter. So you've got opportunity to take stock, refine the course, etc. going forwards. And then next slide, please. I think it's the final slide. So this is the guessing. So what might you be about to ask? And I thought it'd just be worth highlighting a couple of these points. So the first one around, does this mean the capital program is full? Because you've seen that 4-year trajectory. So it's full in some senses in that we've set what we think the MTFP financing costs are for the capital program. So if we were to add more projects to the capital program, we would have to find more revenue funding for that to fund the financing costs. But there are a couple of options around how we could increase the spend, particularly in the years 2 and 3, around is it going to be self-funding? So this is all explained in section 5 of the report. So is it going to be self-funded? Are there opportunities around increasing capital receipts? So we've assumed 12 million, just over 12 million of capital receipts, but actually if we could bring more capital receipts forward, that would therefore enable us to fund more capital delivery. I mentioned interest rates have been much higher than we've seen in recent years. Again, if we start to see the interest market cool off a little bit, that again would mean our money would go a little bit further in terms of what the financing costs for borrowing are. And then also we've got opportunities around external funding. So anything that we're actively bidding for, any emerging bids coming forwards where we can leverage in additional financing to fund projects, which some of you will have noticed in the slides that kind of years 2, 3 and 4, the fully funded and partially funded start to drop off because often a lot of the opportunities aren't available yet. You know, the announcements haven't been made about future year funding that we can bid for. So again, that will build up as we bid for more. And in terms of what happens, so for new ideas that want to be brought forwards, so again, these will be brought forward in the way outlined in section 6. So that's the formal governance process around the briefing cabinet members, working through those business case stages, following obviously some kind of informal conversations between officers, working out how we might bring a scheme forwards. And then the last bit is around, will we really deliver 128 million? So that is the 128 million pound question, really. And as part of the review, we've undertaken looking at the resources. So that peer review group was essentially led by finance, but also had property colleagues, assets and resources, etc., on the call to make sure we were understanding how we're going to resource the delivery of these projects, what are the professional services required to deliver this in reality. So we also did a further review of all the schemes over £1 million to understand how that is going to be resourced. So is it internal resourcing? Are we bringing in contractors? How are we going to deliver those schemes? So again, we've done that, and we're confident that we do have the resources lined up to deliver these schemes, and through the officer kind of oversight and monitoring, we'll be kind of really on this and trying to drive this forwards and unlock all the great outcomes that the capital programme is there to design and deliver. So that's all the slides from me. Over to questions now. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sean. Gary, anything to add?
I would just say that rudely I should have introduced Sean as the new Corporate Director of Finance and Commercial. It's his first cabinet, and welcome. And I have to say, so far, the work contribution has been absolutely excellent, and the work he's done on this capital programme is absolutely second to none. So impressed. So it's a great start.
Right, before I open up to the Cabinet for a debate, any non-executive members wish to comment? Les?
Thank you, Leader. That's an ambitious plan, a lot of work there. I know we struggled with some of our disposals, acquisitions, rents and leases with the council. Have we got the resources to deliver this, and can we do it efficiently with the people that we've got? Or
Who am I going to look at? Gary? Kick it.
I mean, the whole purpose of this exercise has been to rationalise what's been going on. I think you probably saw from previous finance reports that we were something like £200 million behind the curve on capital. And if anything, although we've been enormously successful in controlling the revenue budget, capital has been, I'm not saying it's a failure, but it certainly hasn't performed to the extent we'd like. And therefore, this refresh is all about capacity and of course, about the financial implications. We believe it's achievable, or we wouldn't have put it forward. We will see.
You're going to get a second answer to your question from Tony Ferrari.
Thank you, Chair. Once we worked out that there was more than we could do, both financially and in terms of officers and resources and stuff, we carried out this exercise to produce the list that we wanted to do. And now we have the list that we want to do. We don't have the resources, but we are bringing in the resources to deliver the programme that we want. What was impossible was chasing an enormous and uncontrolled total. But now we've got a plan. We know what it is we're delivering, and we are recruiting to deliver that plan. Thank you.
You're going to get a third answer now. Peter Wolf. Misunderstood. It's a Cabinet question. Right, thank you. Any other questions from non-executive members? If not, I'll open up to the Cabinet. And we'll start with Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, excellent piece of work, and I'm really pleased that we seem to have a handle on what the situation is. Even if you get a handle on a situation and it's not quite as good as you thought it was, it's better to know where you are than to think you're somewhere different. In terms of the governance, Section 7, you've got CASAM, which for those people who are not familiar with acronyms, is the Capital Strategy and Asset Management Group, and that's a group of officers. You've got the senior leadership team, you've got audit and governance, which can look at it in some cases after the event. You've got cabinet and you've got council. And all of those have an essential part to play in the governance process. However, I believe you've got two other areas that you haven't put in. And I'm sorry, the paper's been out for a few days, but it's only now that I've got round to reading it and then thinking, this isn't there. The two things that are not there, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of governance, are A, the overview committees that help us to develop policy and will do so in terms of capital projects. Now, it may be there somewhere else in the report, but I'd like it quite clear that they play a part in this. And I know from my own portfolio, but I think it's really important that they see that they're part of the process. And the second thing is, and I'm sorry, this is becoming a bit of a nag now for me, if there's a capital project that is within a particular member's ward rather than stretched across the piece, or, you know, a multi-member ward, I don't care, those members must be involved and engaged with according to the member protocol. We've had 3 incidents just lately where the member protocol has not been followed or not clearly understood. And as we're almost restarting this, I'd like the member protocol up front and centre quite early on to make sure that we don't miss it out. So member protocol overview committees, please. Thank you.
You're not on.
Sorry, I've got switched off by someone. Anyway, yeah, thank you very much, Peter. They're all. I think we probably saw the overview position as a natural progression, so haven't put it in. It would happen anyway. I note what you say about the 3 projects. I'm not familiar with them, but we'll ensure that doesn't happen, and it'll be part of the protocol. Thank you.
Sorry, Joe. The 3 projects I'm referring to, none are in your area. But I'm not going to go into them because we've already talked about it. And I'm just making a more general point that the member protocol, I think, has perhaps slightly drifted off and we need to change it. And it needs to be in here full up. Thanks.
Any other members of the Cabinet wish to comment? Ray.
Thank you, Leader. And can I start off by saying thank you for the work that's gone into this report. It's absolutely essential that we understand what we can do, not what we can't do, and the report does highlight that. The disappointment I've got, obviously, is seeing the reduction in the amount of capital I'm going to get within the highways budget, which has been reduced, but I fully understand the need for this. I endorse what Gary said right from word go. This is brought about by the increase in interest costs, and we, as a council, have and always will do live within our means, and this is an important step forward. I would also like to get confirmation that this is definitely a living report, and if we find something that is slightly astray, we can amend it straight away. I'm happy to work with the finance team on a couple of elements that I have a concern over, not for this meeting because they need an in-depth discussion, but as long as this is a living document and remains a living document, then I'm very happy to give it my support.
Well, I think you'll get a reassurance that it is a living document. I think that was touched on earlier. It is, because it's got to be dynamic, otherwise it's not a tablet of stone, but it is a really good outlook about some of the key things we can deliver. And picking up Leslie's point about resource, we have done a lot of work in improving the resource availability anyway to help us deliver our capital programme. So I'm reasonably confident that this is doable. I like the word doable because it fits with us being bold and ambitious, doesn't it? Anybody else? If not, any member of the Cabinet disagree with the recommendation set out in the report? In that case, in the absence of any disagreement, the recommendations are approved. Right, we move on. Thank you very much, Sean. Move on to agenda item 9 now, which is a Swanage Capital Assets Transfer. I hand over to Councillor Andrew Parry.
Thank you, Chair. I'm delighted to bring this paper to Cabinet. As people will be aware, I have great fondness for the coastal community of Swanage, having spent many a happy childhood holiday in there. So the importance of a quality family environment in that important part of Purbeck and the coastal community is significant to us. Just to recap for the benefit of everybody present, of course, the Family Hub programme is significant for Dorset and for Dorset Council, partly because we are, of course, one of the only 12 councils nationally to receive the initial funding of £875,000 from central government to roll out the Family Hub model. And with our own £342,000 worth of Dorset Council funds used as well to support it. Now, the first 2 family hubs have been established in the east of the county, so to bring the third into the Purbeck region is significant for us and a very welcome addition to the models that we are using across county wide. But it was even more significant that we did use the opportunity to co-produce this piece of work, and it's been a long time in its formation, working with the Swanage and Purbeck Development Trust, as we heard earlier, and the Swanage Town Council. And it boiled down to the opportunity for community asset transfer. And this is something that we spoke about significantly when we established Dorset Council and would look for the right opportunities where it be appropriate to do that. I'm hugely grateful, of course, to our colleagues and officers in the corporate directorates and the place directorates who have worked night and day, really, to help find the right way of navigating this through to Cabinet today. The legalities of such transfers are never straightforward, even though they might look so on first glance. But we've got there. And the building in Chapel Lane is in a position where we feel we can recommend to Cabinet for its transfer to the Trust. The report's authors are with us today in the chamber, as Tracy Old, the report author, along with Claire Shields as the corporate director responsible for overseeing the Family Hub programme. There are 4 recommendations to Cabinet today, but could I bring your attention, please, to the second part of the recommendation, where we are going to propose just a tiny amendment, which is to delegate authority to the Executive Director for Place in consultation with the Cabinet portfolio holder for assets and property, Councillor Ferrari. And I think that oversight by members is certainly required. With your indulgence, Chair, perhaps Claire Shields may wish to address on the operational side of the policy.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Claire Shields. I'm the Corporate Director for Commissioning and Partnerships in Children's Services, and I'm the Senior Responsible Officer for the Family Hub programme across Children's Services. And really delighted to bring forward this piece of work. We have been working with People and Health Overview on the Family Hub model, and we've taken 2 papers through there around what the model for Family Hubs will look like across the county. And I've had some really good member engagement in what that looks like and as we move forward. Long-standing conversation with Swanage around how we can make the best use of both the strengths within the community and the Community Wellbeing Initiative alongside the assets that we as a council have had. And we have a long relationship with the Swanage and Purbeck Development Trust who have experience of working with us in this way. So we're really confident about our ability to deliver good services for the people of Swanage in that community using these assets in the best way and getting the best return. Bob Foster mentioned the opportunities that come with this and the benefits. So huge employment benefits and opportunities for more work over in the Swanage area, and huge opportunities for us in Children's Services to be able to deliver differently and meet the needs of communities managing that whole portfolio of assets that are available to the community over there. So when we're talking about a family hub in Swanage, real national interest in this being an exemplar of delivering intergenerational services across the whole town. So it's a real opportunity for us to do something different, to showcase Dorset across the national arena and to make this a really, really strong offer for the communities of Dorset. Tracy Old, who is operationally responsible, is just going to talk a little bit about our readiness to go.
Thanks, Claire. My name's Tracy Old, and I've got the responsibility of our transformation projects within Children's Services, which, as Claire describes, the implementation of family hubs is one of those. We're really excited about the project in Swanage, which will, as Claire suggests, will see that opening of a national exemplar, which will meet the needs of the local community and really supports the delivery of our children's and adult services commissioning strategies as well. And we've got really good capacity in place that will deliver this work, and we're ready to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you. Andrew, anything else to add? Right, before we have the Cabinet debate, I'm going to open it up to members and non-executive, and I know that Bill Trite wishes to comment as a local member.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. At the risk of sounding like Mr. Picky, could I just point out that there are, I'm afraid, multiple errors in the name of the Swanage and Purbeck Development Trust in this report, and they're included in the recommendations. So for the sake of clarity, please note that it is the Swanage and Purbeck Development Trust, SPDT, and not some of the variations which actually figure in the report. Chairman, some of the reasons that many people in Swanage and Purbeck were concerned at the demise of the District Council and the transfer of its functions to a county-wide authority were the increased remoteness of decision-taking, the diminished local input into that decision-taking, and a range of potential disadvantages associated with centralisation, such as have certainly been experienced in this part of Dorset in respect of planning and development control. However, the proposals before you today are, I'm glad to say, in exactly the opposite direction, in the right direction, the direction of all the best aspects of localism. This is particularly important for a relatively isolated community like Swanage and reflects the commitment in the Swanage local plan to retain and improve as many services as possible within the town, since there are no close geographical substitutes available to the many residents who are elderly or not so well off or not very mobile for whatever reasons. The Swanage and Purbeck Development Trust itself has a very good track record in serving the local public interest with its excellent work to date at the centre, at Hurston Hall, at the football club, and in connection with the community bus. All the indications are that Dorset Council and Swanage Town Council too can place confidence in this organisation. Just one reservation, if I may, and I'm not sure whether Councillor Parry's amendment addresses this in any way, but I will nevertheless state it. My reservation concerns the 3 bullet points in recommendation 2. There is some concern locally that the inclusion of these bullet points will effectively hand control of this project to the asset management team, potentially meaning that any actual transfer could be delayed for many months. Could I have some reassurance, please, that this will not in fact be the case? Could we put a deadline on the transfer so that the project does not drift? Otherwise, I fully support the recommendations and ask the Cabinet to be sure to endorse them. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Bill. Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. I'm always a pleasure to hear from Councillor Trite on his passion for Swanage and the fantastic community spirit that has shown time and time again by Swanage. In respect of the ambition of Children's Services, we would not wish to see any form of delay in the asset transfer. We very much want to hit the ground running. I do appreciate any property transfer can run into technical or legal glitches. That would not necessarily be the responsibility of Children's Services. It's possible that perhaps John Selgren or Grace Evans may be in a position to comment if there's likely to be any anticipated delays.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Parry and Councillor Trite. So Grace and I, as Head of Legal Service, have discussed this this morning, just to confirm that. So as we currently understand the position on that asset and those 2 properties, there are no impediments to why this can't be progressed at pace. But I think, as ever, members need to be mindful, and Councillor Trite raised the question about assets. So specifically, the bulk of the work is with our colleagues in the legal service. But the considerations be, obviously, there are 2 properties. Confirming the freehold stroke leasehold arrangements that are required, and the report makes reference to putting the asset into an asset lock through the community interest company. There's the valuation to undertake and make sure that is sound, and in particular, to make sure that any undervalue, so this is transferred at a value less than the commercial value, then that needs to satisfy the relevant legal parameters as is again set out in the report, and then some due diligence. The final bit is the service level agreement that's required. And think it through, Chairman, just trying to find an equivalent precedent. There's never, all these things are kind of unique, they're always particular. But if we took the nearest precedent for how long it might take, is that the Redlands transfer, members of this Cabinet will be aware we did recently with the support of the portfolio holder for leisure. From start to finish, the legal work took 3.5 months to complete for that. Chairman, I hope that's helpful, at least responding to the points that Councillor Trite has raised.
Thank you very much, John, as always. John Andrews.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I'd just like to point out that community assets, when we transfer them for a specific use, we must put that specific use firm in the transfer paperwork, because we now in Sherborne still have a community asset that was transferred to a trust for use as a community asset. It's still now growing brambles 10 years later. That was agreed by the predecessor DCC Council. So we have to tie it up that if that building or that asset doesn't get used for community use at any time in the future, and I commend the Swanage Purbeck Trust, SDP, PD, anyway, for what they do, because I think it's fantastic, that if for any reason that trust folds, whatever, that asset comes back in the ownership of Dorset Council.
Andrew.
Thank you. I'm sorry to hear from Councillor Andrews that they've experienced that difficulty in Sherborne on an asset relating to the former authority. In respect of this particular proposal, of course, 9.2 of the report does very much set out our views on how that facility should be transferred and the safeguards that need to be in place. But I'm sure the legal team would be happy to meet with Councillor Andrews or anybody else to alleviate any concerns that they may have, and indeed myself, if such concerns aren't correctly addressed.
Anybody else? If not, I'll open up to Cabinet colleagues. Gary.
Thank you, John. What an exciting project this is, and an example of how the Town Council, the Development Trust, and the County, or Unitary Authority, get it right, have worked together to enable this to happen. I don't believe there will be delays. I can't see any particular reason. I'm excited by what John Selgren says about the asset transfer. In particular, there's another project we're trying to do, so I assume that will be just as quick, John, which will be good news. But I think this is an example of what can be achieved when you all work together, and in particular, the commitment of a development trust for Swanage is something that we should support. They have been absolutely fantastic in Swanage. This gives them a further opportunity to enhance the facilities and the give to Swanage. And I'm, as you can say, hugely excited and supportive. And any delay, I am sure we will be round at John's door, knocking on, saying, "What happened, John?" Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Any other Cabinet colleagues? And this is an exciting project. Ray.
Yeah, I'd just like a little bit of clarity on 9.2, because having read it, the initial statement says the council is transferring the freehold interest, and then a bit further down it refers to lease. Can I get some clarity from somebody on this, please? Because I find that statement quite confusing.
Get you an answer. Claire, you've put your hand up.
Yeah, I'm happy to take it. So it's just setting out the arrangements for should it be a freehold transfer, what we need to do, and should it be a long leasehold transfer, what we need to do. So there are two options of community asset transfer for us to choose from, and we'll do that alongside the Swanage and Purbeck Development Trust and our legal team to make sure that we're getting best value for the council. So it's just setting out there are two options and what those options include.
Laura.
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly, Laura Beddoe, Culture, Communities and Customer Services. I just wanted to pick up on, Gary, what you said and highlight the fact that if communities want to drive things in their area, quite often they know best. And I think this item really, really showcases what is possible if we all work together, and I think that should be celebrated. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura, and I endorse what you just said as well. Anybody else? So then members of the Cabinet disagree with recommendations. I can't hear you. Do we have it proposed? Proposed, and we need a seconder, Gary. Okay, thank you, Kate, you're absolutely right. So any member disagree with the recommendations in the report? In that case, in the absence of any disagreement, the recommendations are approved, subject to the amendment that Andrew tabled. Right, we then move on to agenda item 10, Children's Services Annual Self-Evaluation, and it's Andrew Perry.
Thank you again, Chair. Yes, it's been an incredibly busy year for Children's Services, and in the blink of an eye, we seem to be here again writing our annual self-evaluation. I know that the Executive Director in a moment would like to take us through her own presentation to perhaps add to some of the quality of the report before us, but it is a comprehensive report, and there are some things that we need to understand in the context of it. So whilst we have seen and succeeded in our ambition to reduce the number of Dorset children that have come into our care, that has been balanced by an increase from government in the number of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children that Dorset Council takes responsibility for. The report also highlights that there are 530 care leavers now that we have a responsibility towards, and we're acutely aware of their needs being met as well. But good news on that front is, of course, the delivery of Kirkleton Avenue and the care leaver accommodation as part of our proposals to support them, in addition to other measures, which, of course, we voted on very early on as a council, which included, of course, the council tax exemption for care leavers remaining in the Dorset Council area. I know that we were often challenged about the cabinet model that we operate as a council, and actually the effectiveness of it is absolutely underpinned by our governance structures, and that certainly applies in children's services. The establishment of the Dorset Education Board, the establishment of the Birth to Settled Adulthood Board, we have the Strengthening Services Board, the Corporate Parenting Board, the Strategic Alliance for Children and Young People, and the Virtual Schools Governing Board. That's not an exhaustive list, but it certainly demonstrates our commitment to showing that we are acutely aware of our need to be accountable at all times. We've also seen the launch of the Mockingbird, a fantastic cooperative, the Constellation model that helps support our foster carers. And of course, if we do look at our children in care, what a fantastic facility in the Dorset model for children's services in the new harbour facilities that we have at Weymouth. So there's an awful lot of good news in the report. It is a very detailed report, I know, and I'm sure people will want to ask me questions of it. But I would, with your indulgence, like to hand over to Teresa Levy as Executive Director for her presentation to you.
Thank you, Councillor Parry. Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to go through some brief slides to try and bring into some synopsis what is a very large report. Children's services across the country are required to undertake a self-evaluation that then undergoes peer review from other DCSs in their region. So we've been through that process already, and that peer review takes support and challenge to those self-evaluations. We then present it to a panel of Ofsted inspectors in what's called an annual conversation, and they again provide further cross-challenge to that position. So as you'll all appreciate, Children's Services is highly regulated, and I'm delighted to support my adult services as they head towards that level of regulation too, but it does provide a particular rigour, and I think an opportunity for real transparency for us as a council as we look at what it is that we've been achieving and focusing on in the last year. So some of these slides are slides that we've taken through with Ofsted, so you'll be all very familiar with the factual bits around where Dorset is and how we are. I think the important message for us with our Ofsted colleagues is to understand that in very, very many ways, as you'll see in the report, most of the children that grow up in Dorset have a really fantastic life and outcome. But where we need to focus on, and the purpose of your Vulnerable Children's Services Directorate, is to focus on those that are not yet having the kind of life outcomes we want for them. And for too many of our children still, particularly those who live in poverty, the disadvantage gap in education is a real focus for us. So throughout the report, you will have noted that we focus heavily on vulnerable groups. It's our responsibility to do that. And those vulnerable groups go across all of our work, whether that's our work with schools, our work in the early help space, or our work in social work. And so again, when we come to our work in social work, we're often looking at the very worst outcomes for our children in our communities, and we're doing that with our police and our health colleagues in that contextual safeguarding piece. And you'll see, again, in the report, lots of times and places where we know where our biggest challenges are, and we're working carefully to think about resolving those. So Ofsted would agree with us that we have a strong leadership and strong strategic partnerships, and that's at every level. So they feel very reassured by the level of governance that Councillor Parry's just outlined, a real clear structure to the way in which we do our work, that governance across our safeguarding and across our strategic priority setting is really strong. But most importantly, that's all underpinned by an incredibly positive and stable workforce. And I will, throughout this brief presentation, celebrate the staff that work within Children's Services. They are extraordinary. They bring love and compassion to their work. And that has a cost to it at difficult times, but they do that work. We don't make widgets in Children's Services. We are working with people, and when you work with people, the only person you really bring is yourself. And they bring themselves every day. They turn up, they shape up, and they deliver really great work. So in many ways, that's a huge part of our asset. We need to share with Ofsted and others our financial context, and we do that. And our financial context, as you well know, is that we've been managing, as has already been stated today, within that general fund allocation. We've been driving out savings year on year, and we drove out savings again this year in terms of changing life outcomes. So we never set a target for lowering the numbers of children in care, but we knew that that would happen if we worked well with our families and communities to support children being at home. And that's a big part of our change. From a peak of 490 Dorset children in our care, today we're down to almost 400. Larger number when we add our unaccompanied minors, but a significant change over the last couple of years. And again, really big and bold investment from this council in the lives of children with SEND. We know nationally that remains a huge challenge. The numbers of children who are presenting with additional educational needs has clearly been impacted by COVID. That has an impact upon our high needs block reduction strategy. There are two things we need to do. We need less children to have complex needs and support them earlier in order to do that. And when they do have complex needs, we need to be able to meet those needs cheaper, more locally. Our plan has an approach for both of those things, and we're making progress, but it is probably one of the hardest areas for us all to be working in at the present time. But big investment in our care homes, huge delivery across our assets and place colleagues in terms of getting us more places for our children to be here in homes that we are providing, both for our children in care and our care leavers. And that has required a whole council approach to really owning the responsibility for our children in care. And I was delighted at last week's Corporate Parenting Board to have a significant presence from our corporate colleagues in that place, delivering their corporate parenting responsibility alongside us. And our young people who were present in that Corporate Parenting Board really welcoming the expertise across the corporate centre that people can bring to really making sure our children in care have the right life to be a really effective and wholesome citizen of the future. And there's two of them who have been delighted and happy to share their photographs as they enter Kirtleton Avenue. These are 8 new homes, forever homes potentially, for some of our young people whilst they settle into their care leaver period of time before they can go on and live fully independently. And that's a really important piece of work that we've done this year. So we work with many thousands of children in different levels of need, and that's all that slide's telling us really, but you can see the kind of numbers that we're working with every day means that we have to be really flexible around how we deploy our staff, and we do. One of the key elements that's required within the new children's social care strategy, stable homes built on love, and for which some local authorities will be pathfinders, more later, is that actually this is around needing to rebalance the system. And what that means is that it is well understood now within research. Children's social work was often something that wasn't very researched back in the day when some of us started in it. There is now a huge volume of research, and the research shows really clearly where it is safe to do so, and we always have that rider, children are best brought up within their families. And that isn't just a kind of light and cosy and easy thing to say. It's just that even where sometimes they'll have continual problems within those families, it's not to say that everything will be gorgeous all the time. Their life outcomes are still far better if we can wrap around and provide intensive support to keep them in those families. And that's what we're really driven to do. Of course, there are some times in our work where children are at very serious danger, and then we must act, and we must act decisively, quickly and effectively, and find them other forms of permanent care, which we do. But the really important part of our change of our system is to what we call rebalancing the system, which is to have higher level of early help and a lower level of top-end need. Now, that's a degree of alchemism, if I'm honest. There's a degree of magic in how you do that, but actually you do it when you have really fantastic staff, I'll call them again, who really drive that from a cultural position of believing it's possible and working with families to change. And we can show that evidence, and that's really well understood within the Department of Education and beyond. And you have to manage it. You have to manage that system really tightly. So we are very structured, very particular in the way in which we manage that early help and the way in which we manage that work into social work. Part of that means that it is very rare, almost exceptional now, for a child to come into our care in an unplanned way. Historically, in old DCC council territory, all of the children were coming into care in an unplanned way, unexpected, and it's very difficult to plan for, and it becomes very expensive. Almost all of our children now have been through the process of what we call pre-proceedings before they become in our care. The families know they're coming. They've had the opportunity to meet with their lawyers. They've had the opportunity to change and to have all of those services wrap around them. That's clearly a much more healthy way for us to be working as a system. It's more effective in terms of planning for life outcomes, and potentially it's more efficient as well. We have a range of early help. We've talked about this a lot in this chamber. We don't understand that families will only need help from one worker, but that actually they may well get their help from a range of different places. The family hubs, as you've already heard about this morning, being a key part of that. Our communities want to and are absolutely able to provide more help earlier for our families, and we want to simply get behind, get out of the way of them doing so, and be able to support them in doing that, and the family hub work is part of that. Social work's a really important part of our business, our front door that has been incredibly strongly held throughout the whole of the COVID period. I speak to DCSs around the country, Children's Services around the country, whose front doors have fallen over because of the level of requirement. Our front door stays really well stood up. And what that looks like is if you have a concern about a child being safe, you pick up the phone to our Children's Advice and Duty Service, and you have our best trained staff, our best trained social workers there to be able to talk to you immediately. Our other partners and our families tell us that's hugely important. They don't have to go through a preamble with one person to get passed on to somebody else before they get passed on. They have an opportunity to immediately speak to a highly qualified child protection social worker who understands what the risks might be and can help them support those. And that principle is very much celebrated by the National Review, and we can see that going forward. I'm not going to go through all of these slides, but again, Councillor Parry has talked about some of these matters that we've already responded to. We are driven by data and evidence. So where we pick up a data issue, where we pick up a need in our communities, our staff and our managers and their leaders work together to develop whatever projects need to be developed to respond to that, taking the best of what the evidence is from around the country. So the Pineapple Project is a very local, that's a Dorsetism. That's absolutely something that our staff have developed and is increasingly getting a lot of national acclaim, working intensively with our girls in the community and increasingly our boys too, to keep them safe. But Safeguarding Families Together and the Mockingbird Project, these are national projects that we've been able to take the best of and implement within Dorset. It's a constant for us all. It's been said again before in this chamber, and I'll say it again. Child exploitation happens in every village, town and city in this country. It changes in shape and nature but it happens every day in every way. Sometimes it's on that county lines piece that you'll all have heard of in terms of the train lines, but often it's also simply groups of young people who are exploited by whoever's moving into that space to exploit them. So we work incredibly hard with our police colleagues and our community safety partnership to really think about how we tackle that on an everyday basis. And more, and more. So this is all here for later, but this is all just kind of summarising where we've got to. That graph's important. You don't need to be able to see the detail, but the importance of it is the upward line. That means that month on month, year on year, we've been bringing online more Dorset accommodation for children in care and children and care leavers. And that's really important because we've needed to kind of really do that. It is our statutory responsibility to have sufficient care provision. It's our statutory responsibility to have sufficient early years provision, and our statutory responsibility to have sufficient school places around Send. It's not something that's nice to do. It's absolutely the reason for us existing in many ways, and the local government have all of that responsibility, and that's just one part of that sufficiency requirement. Lots of new activity in that space, therefore, lots of building work, as I've said previously, from our colleagues across the board. Really grateful to colleagues leaning in and joining us in that huge work programme. And more to do, and there are challenges. As of last month, we were certainly the only local authority in the South West region who didn't have any under 16-year-olds in unregulated provision. You know, I've said before in this chamber, I don't want to be in that place. I don't want to have children in unregistered provision. But the 16 and 17-year-olds who we can have in unregulated provision, Ofsted distinguished the language, increasingly we are working towards trying to ensure they are also in Ofsted registered provision. Announced yesterday, by October of this year, we will have to have all 16 and 17-year-olds in Ofsted registered provision. That is a huge challenge for the country and us as a county, especially around that most of our young people are unaccompanied minors. And lots of businesses that provide accommodation for 16 and 17-year-olds, if I'm honest, don't want to go through the process of registering with Ofsted. It's not seen as something that is a very straightforward approach for them, as we'd all understand why. So more on that in the coming months. It's certainly an area we would welcome bringing to overview and potentially to scrutiny. We're really explicit about our areas of challenge, and we're explicit both in this chamber and in our partnership conversations, because many of our areas of significant challenge are partnership challenges. Our relationship with our health colleagues is very good, but they would absolutely agree that there is a road to travel around child and adolescent mental health services and around complex services for young people with really high-level needs. Where that doesn't exist, and I'm afraid it doesn't exist often enough in the health provision at the present time, the requirement clearly falls back to us as a local authority. And we are then in a position of attempting to find a suitable offer for a child with really complex needs that historically may well have found themselves in a Tier 4 hospital bed. But in the absence of those beds existing, that work is falling to us. Now, that's an important conversation for me to have with them strategically, but the really important element of that is, are our children getting their needs met in the way they need them to be met? And we're kind of continuing to have those conversations. So we know where we need to focus. We know that it's around all of that joint commissioning, making sure that our health colleagues are holding up their end of the requirement as well. CAMHS services have always been underfunded nationally, but we're not presently even securing that level of funding that we need. So as part of the support to that, I've agreed to be the senior responsible officer for the CAMHS transformation in effort to really give that drive and push to where we need to get to. So lots of work undergoing, and more on that another time. Andrew's already talked about our Dorset Education Board. Schools Best Education for All, really clear focus. We want good and outstanding schools only. Many of our maintained schools are already good and outstanding. They are outstripping our academies at the moment. 86% of our maintained schools are good or outstanding against 78% of our academies. But we also want a good or outstanding school to be a great school, and by that we define that as an inclusive school. So we're not only just looking for great teaching, but including all of our children. So really driving that through, and therefore the disadvantage attainment and achievement gap will be impacted positively. More in there, just Permanent exclusions, we've talked again in this chamber before, coming down, but it still remains a huge challenge for us. And we can see that some of those issues that young people are facing are proving to have real challenges for our schools. Attendance, we know we're focusing on that. So we've been through that, I think, before here. I won't go into that. Elective home education. Again, our numbers are much better than others, if I'm honest. And we're in a place where we've got a really good system around that. We are still expecting, although still awaiting, a national statement about having a register of education, electively home educated children. That hasn't come through in the way that we thought it might do, along with the SEND and alternative provision paper, but we continue to work on that extensively to keep those children safe and, where possible, return them to school. Okay. I'm just going to whip through. How do we know? So we've got a really extensive quality assurance framework. We audit work at all sorts of levels, all sorts of ways, with all sorts of people. We have a practice week coming up where many members and senior staff will also go back to the floor with staff to observe practice, to be really in that moment to see how things are going. And we have a range of activities that tell us how we're getting on and where we need to be working more effectively. Sadly, we sometimes have to learn from the worst outcomes, and so where a child is significantly injured or sadly dies from harm or neglect, there's a whole process we go through to take that learning. And you'll see sometimes we have to do those serious incident notifications to Ofsted, which we always do, sometimes even if it's a child that's died in our area that isn't one of our children. Safeguarding and education, big focus for us. Workforce, a big focus. I think that really it's a national challenge. We know that 25% of the people that left social work last year were in their first year. So nationally, one of the real tragedies is that we're training people up and they're leaving us too quickly. Now, that isn't our story. We are maintaining our retention of our staff, but we need to be really alert to the fact that nationally, that's a tragedy if we've got 3 and 4 years of people training and then leaving the profession immediately. We've actually, in the last month, recruited 8 new social workers, which we're delighted by, because that means that we'll be almost, up to where we need to be in terms of our cover. And we're seeing the constant flow coming through, which is really important, just because, the reality is we are, as a social work in particular, is an older profession, and people are growing older and going out of the profession. So we do need to keep that focus. I think our invest in our own, so we had 25 young people we invested in the last 3 years, has really, really borne benefit to us because we haven't been kind of quite so impacted as others have by that gap. But well-being remains really important. We've got, now my slides won't move on, hang on. There we go, thank you. So it's really important that we keep hold of that well-being because we know that the impact of the work is significant. So we do lots with young people. We learn from others a lot. We continue to learn all the time. We continue to do peer reviews and learning there. We continue to offer them to others, and we continue to bring in others to judge our work. Working now with Oxford Brookes University to do an appraisal of our model will give us some really good impact information as we go forward. Lots in the early years. You'll have heard of a whole range of activity that early years need to be undertaking in terms of meeting the new policy requirements. We've already got a significantly good early years offer. Most of our provision is good or better, and they've also been using extra hours to be able to close the COVID gap. Holiday activities and food programme. It's been a really important programme, actually, offered to so many children across our county, and it's something that we do fairly easily and straightforwardly now, having gone from a very fast start. I'm going to just go back to that one, which isn't very easy to read. But fundamentally, those are our 10 priorities for children's services for the coming year. They are some of the things already work in progress, some of the things more for us to focus on even more deeply. But those are the things that I think in terms of challenge and scrutiny we'd want to offer along with these 3 key priorities as areas where we would see our soft spots, really. So having family feedback at the heart of everything we do, really families' decision-making, driving their own plans, really important aspect for us. Sufficiency of placements for children in care and closing the deprivation and disadvantage gap in education. And those, if I had to take our 10 down to 3, would be the 3. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Andrea, anything to add?
Well, only after that very comprehensive briefing from the Director that, of course, I refer back to one particular line in the 2021 Ofsted report that said, when it came to Dorset Children's Services, good work is expected, delivered and celebrated. And we as an employer of choice very much take that to heart. The challenge back to us from councillors, of course, from the staff is that is their mantra to us. What are we going to do to support them in delivering that time and time again? So, you know, we have heard today that it isn't a finished piece of work. It's a constantly developing piece of work with new challenges that we're going to see. I'm delighted to hear the reference to the need to engage with Overview this year. The challenge around unregulated places is going to be a very serious one for us to meet. And actually I welcome it. I genuinely welcome that move nationally, but of course I would have welcomed it with a little bit more notice. But there we go, the Minister has their reasons, I'm sure. But the report recommendations does state that Cabinet are asked to review and consider the content of the annual self-evaluation for children's services, noting the strengths, continuous improvement approach and next steps. Very happy to take questions.
I take it you move the recommendation. Is there a seconder? Second by Jill. Thank you. Non-Cabinet colleagues, any comments? Paul.
Thank you, Chair, fellow councillors. And I always remember when I first joined this council, the first thing you said to me, you have a responsibility for every child in Dorset. And at the time I thought, wow, that is some burden. I hope today that we can, on the recommendation, give our thanks for all the work that's been done. And I thank Teresa and the team for that, for what they're doing. And I can only imagine that some of the situations and the work that we have to do. I want to ask I want to ask a question. Teresa said we made savings. My question is, will those savings have an impact on the service? You don't get one without the other. Thank you.
Paul, comments? Andrew?
Oh.
Says no, but we're...
Okay, thank you. I'm delighted that Councillor Kimber refers to when he first arrived at the council. When I first arrived at the council as the newbie, I was sat in a committee next to a Councillor Kimber who was very kind and generous and given me his time and support on how I should conduct myself. And I've taken that to heart ever since, so thank you. In respect of children's services and the savings, we set out a savings efficiency. You know, there has been a new mindset that has said, look, we can achieve fewer children in care, better supported families, lower costs in how we deliver that. Those efficiencies can be delivered. It's really it is the absolute fundamentals of early help and support. If we put that in there, yes, it might cost us a little bit more upfront, but the delivery of those savings at the back end are significant. You know, we already heard, for example, about the planned admissions of children into care. If you are not spot paying a place in a children's home, but you are dealing with a managed situation where a child perhaps could be in a special guardianship arrangement or in a foster home in the county rather than being out of county, that can halve your costs and more. You know, it's a very, very significant piece of work to do. If we look at meeting children's needs so that the needs are identified early on rather than perhaps at the age of, you know, when I say early on, I mean literally in the sort of preschool phase of their life rather than perhaps in the latter primary school part of their life, those savings will be significant in how we support them. You know, there's a huge piece of work to do there. The whole point of the sort of Blueprint for Change model was also that children's services over the years had become a sort of bolt-on, lots and lots of bolts-on, and actually a bit like an old internet program where you keep bolting on new apps and adaptations, it becomes a bit clunky. Blueprint for Change was all about stripping all that out and looking at an efficient delivery of service. and working in a different way. It was moving to that locality model. It was delivering what was required where it's required. And, you know, that's why, for example, we put additional support into the Weymouth and Portland area. In the Chesil locality, we recognised that there were higher levels of deprivation there, and that we couldn't deliver a one-size-fits-all in each of the localities. It had to be tailored. In other localities, they have different arrangements, I know. So it's all those component parts, and I do appreciate Teresa will want to come in on this, but all those different component parts that have delivered those efficiency savings, and they are multi-million-pound savings, not just 1 year, but every year that we operate, and that really is to be applauded.
I don't think she does. I think you've covered that off very well, and it was a good question and a very comprehensive and relevant response, Andrew. Any other colleague before I open up the Cabinet? Shane.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, it would be remiss of me as an elected member not to congratulate the children's team on what they've done. Councillor Parry is well aware that we've got a project ongoing in Wimborne, which he's very supportive of today, about providing that safe space for children. And I will pick up those conversations with you, Councillor Parry, outside this meeting, if that's okay. And I just wanted to commend the children's team for the work they're doing. None of us want to be in a position where we're in a council authority that is failing children. And it does appear to me that year on year, with this new authority, the children's team have been doing an excellent job and have been moving in the right direction. Savings are important, but it's not all about savings. The principal factor here is that we need to ensure that our children within Dorset are being well looked after and cared for. And I think as members, I think we should take some, a confidence in that we seem to have a really good children's team in place. And I do appreciate the work they're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Shane. Anybody else? I don't see anyone else. Cabinet, Jill.
Gone red, thank you. This is, to be quite frank, a remarkable achievement that's happened here. When I think back to the days when I first came on Cabinet at Dorset County Council and the problems and issues that we were having with children's services in those days, and the runaway costs because things weren't being dealt with in an appropriate and timely manner, to where we've come to today, I really think that our thanks and congratulations need to go to the team for all of the hard work. I think obviously there are areas that continue to be tricky and areas that we continue to need to work on. But I think the fact that we've actually managed to recruit more social workers, where nationally that is a real challenge, the fact that we have got the numbers going down despite the fact that we've had so many children come in as unaccompanied asylum seekers. It's remarkable bit of work, and I want to say thank you for the work that's been done.
Jill, any other members of the Cabinet? Right, do you want to come back?
Only briefly on the 2 points that were raised there. So I think actually Councillor Bartlett gives a fantastic example of where his boots on the ground as the ward member and working between that sort of different parties in his community with children's services has enabled things like the second family hub model being delivered very quickly, which was set up in Wimborne, and certainly the additional youth facilities that we're looking at establishing there are in a far more advanced stage because of that sense of cooperation between parties that he's been able to galvanise. So I'm grateful to him for that. Jill makes it absolutely clear. Yeah, absolutely. We set out to be bold and ambitious in Dorset Council about a new way of delivering children's services. You know, we recognise that the old DCC just did not have the resource that was required to deliver in so many ways of what may have been the ambition at the time. And we have made that a very early commitment of Dorset Council, and hopefully now we are starting to reap those rewards. I will ensure that staff do, perhaps through the Exec Director's weekly messaging to the team, as well as when I have the opportunity to visit different localities, I will ensure, of course, that Council's gratitude for their work is passed on.
Thank you, Andrew. I don't see anyone else. Well, the recommendation has been proposed and seconded. Any member of the Cabinet disagree with the recommendation set in the report? In that case, in the absence of any disagreement, the recommendations are approved. Now, we're going to slightly reorder the agenda. Now, I'm going to go to agenda item 12, then 13, and then back to 11. So I'll hand over to Councillor Ray Bryan.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you for reorganising it so that what I'm going to say makes a bit more sense. I'm going to start off with an introduction to everything we're going to discuss over the next 3 papers. In 2021, we set realistic and achievable ambitions to become a carbon neutral council by 2040 and for Dorset to become carbon neutral by 2050. Since adopting our climate strategy, we've also set it as one of the council's top priorities in our corporate plan. Those aren't just words. We've since set up a programme of work that is driven by a new corporate director, supported with a 10 million of capital funding, and is now reported on biannually. The low carbon Dorset has given millions of pounds to businesses to support their changes towards becoming carbon neutral. We have received a number of very successful bids from Healthy Homes Dorset to help our aim of making our homes as sustainable as possible. We received 19 million for the Solex programme, which has been a major achievement, not just in receiving it, but A, getting the bid in a very short space of time, but also then being able to spend it in what I still consider to be an unreasonable time. The EV infrastructure rollout has just received more money from government, and we're working on ways in which we can adopt more and more of the EV positions. It's no secret that my own highways budget consists mainly of money from central government. It only costs the local council taxpayers under 2 million for funds that we receive. I'd also like to mention that in the waste programme, our recycling rates seem to improve year on year, and great credit go to the waste team, but also to the general public for helping us achieve those numbers. Our Our biodiversity compensation framework have, amongst many other things, driven major progress. I've got to mention 2 other items which I think are important, which aren't on my note here, and that's we've just received a substantial amount of money from government for levelling up. Again, great achievement. We received money for FIPL, which is Farming in Protected Landscapes, from central government to achieve help for the farmers, making their farms more sustainable. As a result of all of this, council emissions have declined by a quarter since 2019. But the challenges remain vast, and the case for action has become more obvious over the last couple of years. With 2022 witnessing the highest global emissions on record and the UK hottest year on record, more complete data for Dorset now available from government also show that the county needs to go slightly faster. We've always been clear these aren't grounds for doom and gloom or despair, but a major opportunity to make our food and energy systems more secure, our homes and transport healthier and cheaper to run, and hold significant potential for creating new skilled jobs. Ultimately, acting on this is not out of fear, but optimism. Cleaner, greener systems for how we power, heat, feed and transport Dorset residents will enable us to nurture prosperous, stronger, healthier communities. Today, 2 years on, I'm pleased that Cabinet can consider these 3 papers to take us that next step further. Our planning guidance, our refreshed strategy and a decision-making tool. Together, these reiterate and clarify our direction and will help us further embed climate, nature and resilience in our decision-making. I'd now like, with your permission, Leader, to move on to the item 12. The paper in front of you, alongside producing the planning guidance, planning guidance, we've also refreshed our 2021 strategy and retitled it to align to our corporate plan priority. The original was noted as a living document that would evolve as delivery and policy progressed, and that certainly has over the past couple of years. As well as our progress locally, government's net zero strategy and the new Environment Act, amongst many other pieces of policy, have given far greater clarity on the national ambition and timelines, with many milestones rapidly approaching this decade. That much of the content of our strategy remains relevant following that is testament to the cross-party executive advisory panel that formed it. And I'd like to take this opportunity once again to thank members of that EAP who took part in this to help us form the original strategy. And for the record, I've arranged this morning with Stephen Ford that we're going to bring the EAP back together for one further meeting so that we can give them a full update and get their up-to-date thoughts on what we're doing. As such, our refresh has repurposed that content rather than rewriting from scratch. As well as updating the narrative on the national policy context, we stress the importance of all three pillars of climate, nature and resilience. We've kept our headline and milestone targets for 2030, 2035, 2040 and the government's stated aim of 2050, but made it clearer and more concise so that it's easier to understand and manage it, focusing on a set of missions. It also outlines some of our short and medium-term priorities, emphasising the urgency and front-loading of action required. We will continue to review and refresh these in the years ahead as technology, delivery and policy continues to evolve. Leader, I've said right from word go that there are two issues that we have to deal with. One is the growing technology, which we're seeing come through in abundance at the moment, and people don't need reminding. I'm quite passionate about the way we fuel our vehicles going forward, and it's nice to see that the vehicle manufacturers are at least catching up with Dorset Council now and starting to introduce plans for the introduction of the hydrogen cars. Delivery will critically require working closely with partners, businesses and our communities. And this council will have a vital leadership role and must set an example. At a DAPTC meeting a couple of weeks ago, where I was challenged by several of the parish and town councils on a number of issues, I gave a commitment to work much more closely with them and to make sure that there are arms and ears out into the market. They have a closer relationship with their local residents than perhaps we do as Dorset Council. That is understandable because that's what they're there for. But we're going to work much closer with them. I welcome Cabinet to join me in reiterating our commitment with renewed clarity so that this council can continue to lead the way towards a carbon neutral, nature positive and resilient Dorset. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Ray. You moved the recommendation, obviously. Another seconder, please. Graham, thank you very much. Right, before I open up to Cabinet colleagues in the chamber, wish to comment? Brian?
Thank you, Chair. When the first climate strategy came out, my main concern, apart from the speed, but we'll set that aside for the moment, was that the areas of ecology and adaptation were perhaps rather underplayed and that there was a lot more to be said and done about them. I'm therefore delighted to see these two further pillars getting this additional emphasis. I'm also delighted to see a bit more in there to recognise that agriculture for Dorset in particular is a problem. There's a new figure in there, which is that it is 33% of our emissions, a whole third, by far the biggest single sector. Some of that, of course, is carbon dioxide, but most of it is methane from pasture land with cattle and sheep, or nitrous oxide, which is derived from fertilisers. Changing both of those things is exceedingly difficult. The paper is a bit coy, I think, about the connection between perhaps reducing pasture land and perhaps eating a bit less meat. I can understand that. It's something which is unattractive, but it's an inconvenient truth to my mind in this area. And agriculture too is under pressure from climate in a different way, which is that the effects of climate change outside this country probably mean that for our food security, we're going to have to provide quite a lot more for ourselves. I'll come on to see some of the implications of that in a minute. Adaptation. We are concerned about floods. We want to be able to use floodplains to take the excess water. We want to be able to use woods to absorb the increased rainfall when it comes in. We may be faced with a circumstance when, if we're getting more rain in the winter and less in the summer, we will need some reservoirs to store some of it. That it takes up a lot of space. I've lost my thread. And we may, to some extent, want more woods for things like making the climate more bearable when it's getting too hot. Ecology. We have about 12% of our land in Dorset protected. We could probably do with rather more. I'm a member of the Dorset Wildlife Trust. I know that reserves work better if they're big, because you get a bigger genetic pool of those rare things to breed with each other. It's also important that you have land corridors between them so that animals and plants can move about. Now, I'm getting to my point now. All of these things are about one thing. They're about land use, how we use our land. And I think we will need, in the next 20 to 30 years, use our land quite differently. We probably need less pasture, more wild land, more woodland, maybe even a bit more land for buildings, because, I mean, although we go on about building land, it's a tiny percentage of our overall land, and you could perhaps make a bit more room for it. How do you make a change in land use? The government has been going to come forward for a very long time now with its new environmental farming programme, and we still don't really know what they're going to do. It's essentially a subsidy regime. Might work, might not work, I'm not sure. I think it's a pity that it may not operate widely enough. There is another way of controlling land use, and it's one that David Walsh has encouraged me to become very enthusiastic about. It's called planning. And the other route is to begin to extend the planning system to rural land use. Now, I can hear the cries of protest already, but I'll lay a bet with you in 10 years' time it'll be here, because there'll be no other way to do it. If you're mildly convinced by this, and I know it's a bit of a flight of fancy, Councillor, proper nouns are losing me. Councillor Bryan was talking about Dorset setting an example. I think this is an area where we might set an example, where at least to begin to have an idea of how, in the future, that our land ought to be used. Just broad percentages. We don't even have to go quite as far as saying this bit's for that and this bit's for something else, but to have a broad idea of the consequences for land use of the long-term programme that's set out here. I'm never satisfied, always want something more, and this is the next one. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. It's eloquent as usual. Comments? Sherry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sherry Jesperson, Hillforts and Upper Townsford. So this is not what did you said, some cries of objection or whatever to what you've just said. It's just a slightly different focus, if I may, to what Brian has just said. one of the points I raised about this document in the overview committee is some of the language, the tone in which it spoke about agriculture, and I'm very pleased to see that some of that has been altered so that it sounds slightly less heated. When we talk about agriculture and farming as part of the problem, let's not forget that agriculture farming is a key industry in Dorset and has been for a very long time, and I hope will be for a very long time in the future. The point about farming in Dorset is Dorset has good farming land. That's why we farm here. That's why we farm here. They don't farm in the same way in Dartmoor or Exmoor or parts of Scotland. We've got the land that's good for farming, and we mustn't overlook that side. It's not just any old land we've got here. We've got good quality agricultural land, and that's why it's a farming county. I would much prefer, I must say, to talk about the agricultural industry as part of the solution, not part of the problem in terms of climate change and the future going forward. There are any number of things that our farming community is already doing to massively increase sustainability, to address climate change, and to have more sustainable food. They're already doing it, and with the right encouragement and indeed the right funding strategies in place, they will be more than willing to do more. So could we please start to talk about our farming businesses, our farming community, the agriculture in Dorset as part of the solution, not part of the problem. I also have to say, in the current cost of living climate, I'm very uncomfortable about any policy that's predicated on the basis of us as a council or us as a community telling people what they should and shouldn't eat. I eat very little meat, far less than I used to say 10 years ago, but I don't think that gives me the right to say to people who are struggling with the cost of living that they need to eat less of one thing and more of another. So could we just be a little bit cautious about going down that route? Brian talks very eloquently about land use. Absolutely, it's about land use. We need to focus on food sustainability. So our land should be used for food production primarily, because that's what the land is good for, and that's the industry that we are expert in this county. And please could we see agriculture as part of the solution, not part of the problem, in our language that we use when we're talking about climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. Anyone else? Or I come back to the Cabinet? All right, Cabinet colleagues, Laura.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to take a very slightly, whilst agreeing, view with Brian. The practical solution may well be land, and I think Sherry's absolutely right to say that we think of our farmers as part of the solution. But I think the single most important thing is that the work that Ray and the team have been doing means that people that weren't talking about this a significant amount of time ago are now talking about this. It's that behaviour change. Ray mentioned coming and speaking to the town and parish councils at their conference. It was incredibly well received. We were learning stuff from them. They were learning stuff from us. That just wouldn't have happened before Ray and the team went about this piece of work. So I think the single most important thing we can do is be talking about it and what we can all collectively do. So I think it's a really, really positive piece of work, and fully support Ray going forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Laura. Anyone else? The Cabinet? Ray, you want to come back?
Yeah, I'm going to get my knuckles slapped by the people at the back if I don't mention this. A couple of pieces of very good news that's been received is the government last week announced results of the latest round of the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund to support energy retrofit measures in social housing. Detailed figures are not yet allowed to be announced, But we are aware that several Dorset social housing providers have secured funds as part of the consortium bid. These include Magna, BCHA and Asta. And I'm going to now really push out on the fact that the housing team and the sustainability team worked very hard to put this together on behalf of the housing providers. And I think, again, it just shows that where we work as teams, we succeed. We're getting better and better at getting bids in and getting the right result. In addition, we're announcing today that the government have awarded nationally 1.8 billion. I wish it was coming our way, but I can't say that, unfortunately, through this social housing or decarb fund. And we actually have been, there's a press release going out today where we've been awarded 4.3 million out of that. And again, it's all good news for Dorset, but it's down to the work that members and officers, by working together with other interested parties, are achieving. This, I think, is a great message for other councils to learn. Thank you, Leader.
Well, it's probably a good note to draw this to a conclusion on a high. And thank you for those who are on the Cabinet for your contributions on this important topic. Been moved and seconded. Does any member of the Cabinet disagree with the recommendations? In that case, in the absence of any disagreement, the recommendations are approved. So we've gone to agenda item 13 now, Ray.
Thank you, Leader. This is introducing the decision wheel. Strengthening delivery will need going beyond strategies and better embedding climate, nature and resilience in our decision making. So that's all bits of the council fully consider their impacts. There isn't a single service that can deal with the challenges alone. And whilst our current templates include sections to set our environmental impacts on new projects and policies, there's no further guidance or need to set this out consistently and robustly. Our new decision-making tool has been developed to prompt officers and members to consider the impacts for climate, nature and resilience, allowing for better deliberation, transparency and more informed decision-making. It's developed by reviewing best practice and engaging across our services. It is simple, quick and easy to use as a device that, through a series of questions, produced a clear visual representation of impacts that can be embedded in committee reports. It will be further supported by training and guidance and will do the critical job of ensuring that our strategy doesn't sit on the shelf, but is deeply embedded in how we develop and consider projects and policies across the Council. I welcome Cabinet to join me in welcoming this tool as a means to ensure that climate, nature and resilience are at the heart of our decision making. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Ray. I assume you're moving the recommendation. Have a seconder, please. Seconded by Andrew. Thank you very much. Right. Non-Cabinet colleagues, any comments? No? Okay. Come back to the Cabinet. Cabinet colleagues, this sounds like a really good tool that we can make great use of. Any particular comments? Or can we agree the recommendation? I'll use the formal words because for the benefit of those online. Any member disagree with the recommendations set in the report? In that case, the recommendations, in the absence of any disagreement, the recommendations are approved. So let me go back to agenda item 11 now, and I invite Councillor David Walsh.
Thank you very much, Leader. Firstly, I'd like to give our thanks to Sarah and Chris, who have been, or are two of our senior planning officers, who have been leading on this invaluable project. Now, since becoming a unitary authority, work to prepare a new Dorset local plan has been underway. Until adoption of the new local plan, the adopted local plans of the former district and borough councils provide the main part of the development plan for their respective areas. Planning applications must be determined in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. The new Dorset local plan will play a key role in delivering sustainable development. However, it will be some time before the emerging Dorset local plan attracts significant weight in the decision-making process. Whilst the adopted local plans provide a policy steer on sustainable design and construction, there is a need to clarify the Council's position prior to adoption of the new local plan to ensure that opportunities for addressing climate change are maximised as new development is brought forward. The Council is also dealing with significant numbers of applications for renewable energy schemes. There is a need to provide guidance to decision makers on the weight to be given to the benefits of such schemes in the context of the climate emergency, alongside other matters such as impacts on landscape and heritage. An interim guidance and position statement has therefore been prepared to highlight existing local plan policies that require developments to mitigate and adapt to climate change and ensure these policies are being applied consistently in tackling the climate emergency. Underline that climate change is a material consideration in determining planning applications. Ensure that planning decisions are, as far as possible, supporting the Council's nature, natural environment, climate and ecological strategy. Introduce a sustainable checklist to be submitted alongside relevant planning applications, and ensure that Dorset Council maximises opportunities to address the climate and ecological emergency through decision-making on development proposals. Subject to the agreement of Cabinet, the interim position statement, sustainability checklist and listed buildings, what you can do for climate change documents, will be subject to a 6-week consultation. This interim guidance and position statement seeks to clarify existing planning policy requirements within the Dorset Council area in relation to planning for the climate and ecological emergency. The statement provides commentary on the weight given to climate change in decision-making and sets out what Dorset Council expects from planning applications given current policy. The statement focuses on new build development and proposals for standalone renewable energy generation schemes and is intended to be in place until the adoption of the new Dorset local plan. This statement primarily relates to issues associated with the climate emergency, and whilst it is recognised that the climate and ecological aspects of the emergency are intrinsically interlinked, the ecological aspects are not specifically addressed in this document, as they are considered to be well covered by existing policy frameworks and guidance. Should there be a future need to clarify the Council's position on ecological matters pertaining to climate change, this will be done as a further piece of work. Alongside the position statement, a sustainability checklist has been prepared for completion by applicants. The Council's local list requires the submission of a sustainability statement for proposals for new build and change of use, subject to certain exemptions, to demonstrate how sustainable design and construction have been addressed. This is to meet the requirements of policies relating to sustainable design and construction in the adopted local plans covering the Dorset Council area. The checklist has been prepared to ensure all relevant matters are considered. The interim guidance and position statement is not in itself planning policy and is not part of the statutory development plan. Instead, it is an explanatory document setting out that climate emergency is a material consideration in decision-making and explaining how Dorset Council will make planning decisions. It identifies how the requirements of development plan policy may be interpreted in assessing development proposals. A sustainability checklist has also been prepared to assist applicants in addressing the sustainability requirements of adopted policies and to encourage best practice. The statement is intended to be a useful resource for planning officers, councillors who sit on planning committees, and applicants. The statement should be read in conjunction with the development plan as a whole. It is intended that this position statement will be in place until the adoption of the new Dorset local plan, and further work will be undertaken in the development of the new Dorset local plan on addressing the many factors that play a role in addressing and adapting to climate change. As concerns about climate change have risen and energy costs are increasing, many people are looking for ways to adapt and retrofit their houses to make them more energy efficient. This can be more challenging in a listed building, which has been designated as a result of its special architectural or historic interest in a national context. Local authorities have a statutory duty to have special regard to the desirability of preserving listed buildings, their settings, and any features of special architectural or historic interest they possess. To assist with this, a document has been prepared, Listed Buildings, What You Can Do for Climate Change, which outlines the importance of the historic heritage and issues to consider when looking at energy efficiency in listed buildings. The documents you are reviewing today are to give clarity to developers, agents and homeowners as to the expectations of Dorset Council. Now, I would like to draw your attention, Chairman, to Appendix 5, which is extracts from draft minutes of Place and Resources Overview Committee on the 9th of February, where this was received and welcomed greatly. Council has welcomed the guidance and checklist, which would both assist applicants and planning committee members. Training requirements were discussed, and it was noted that training would be provided for councillors and officers. Briefings would also be provided for town and parish councils and agents, and there would be a public consultation. Viability issues were considered. The documents provided guidance ahead of the council adopting a new local plan, and issues around sustainability and travel were raised. So I'd just like to say once again, thank you to the officers that have put all this together. As you can see from the papers on my desk, it has been a considerable and huge amount of work that's gone forward with this. So I'd like to thank them all. And with that, Chairman, I have one amendment to the recommendations. I'd like to go through them so people, as a Councillor Clayton who was unsure about the consultation I answered previously in the questions. The recommendations I'm proposing are: 1, that Cabinet consider the context of the report and the interim guidance and position statement, Appendix 1, sustainability checklist, Appendix 2, and listed buildings, what you can do for climate change, Appendix 3. 2, that Cabinet agree the 3 documents in the appendices for consultation, as well as a related amendment to the local list, Appendix 4, and that agreement to any minor changes that are considered necessary prior to the consultation starting can be delegated to the portfolio holder for planning. I then have an amendment to recommendation 3, if you'll bear with me, Chairman. And the recommendation I wish to read: that Cabinet delegates authority to the portfolio holder for planning in consultation with the Executive Director for Place to consider the consultation responses and agree final wording of the documents listed in recommendation 1. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much, David. Do I have a seconder, please? Seconded by Peter. Thank you very much. Non-executive colleagues, any comments? I've got Shane and then I've got...
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Shane Bartlett, Wimborne Minster Ward. I would normally start this with goading my colleague, Councillor John Andrews, about which is the most desirable town in Dorset. But I must take into consideration Councillor Quell and Councillor Lacey Clark. I believe I saw a recent report that stated that Blandford Forum is the most desirable place to live in Dorset. So congratulations, gentlemen. And the reason I air it is because we are blessed in Dorset with a good many historical market towns, and Blandford obviously is one of the most beautiful Georgian towns that's recognised within southern England. That's a fact. And so these historical market towns we've got, and ancient villages that we've got, which have a lot of listed buildings and conservation areas in as well, it has been a continual frustration for planning committees who have had a desire to try and improve the climate change aspects within these buildings and have been hampered by doing so. I think it was stated earlier that the government is trying to catch up with where Dorset wants to be, and I think this is a case in point. And I commend the portfolio holder and his planning staff for all the work they've done on this. 1.24, it says there would be help with consistent planning decision-making, which we know with 3 council planning areas, and strategic planning committee as well. We need that consistency around planning, decision-making. And also at 1.34, it talks about member officer briefings, subject obviously to approval after the public consultation. And could I just get a clarification in terms of those member briefings, I'm assuming they're training sessions, would that also include town and parish councils, please? Because I think that is quite important, that they're actually brief fully through this so that they're consistent in their approaches in the decision-making that they bring to council on their plan applications. Thank you.
You want to take that, David? You take that question of Shane's.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Bartlett. And yes, there's going to be training, and we're going to be looking with the town and parish councils to work with them after Easter. They have already been invited, and we'll be going through these documents with them. So, thank you.
Paul Kimber.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, fellow councillors, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, Shane has asked, one of my questions was to have it obviously circulated around the town and parish councils. I mean, for us on the planning committee, it is important that we keep our town and parishes up to date and fully informed, especially around the listed buildings. It just happened to be also when I was listening to, I don't know if anybody else listens to Radio 4 today. This morning they were talking about, a bit highbrow, I know, we're talking about the new design of homes and using sheep's wool to insulate. So I can say I welcome this document because clearly that we've got a lot to go through and a lot to take in. Thank you.
Much, Paul. Anyone else? Don't see anybody else. Right, Cabinet. Had the proposition been proposed and seconded? Anybody else wish to comment on this? Graham.
Make that work. Look at that. The magic of my little stick. Chairman, we've heard a lot today in the previous papers about climate change. When Dorset Council consulted with our residents, we found that climate change was not one of their highest priorities, yet protecting Dorset's natural environment was. Now, to my mind, that's probably one and the same thing, but it seems as a council we still don't manage to articulate that. And I would urge, please, that we can incorporate this phrase in what we're trying to drive forward, because as I say, it's probably one and the same thing, but if we can bring our residents forward with us, I think it's a better thing than turning them off. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Graham. Ray.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I actually fully agree with Graham on this, which is why on most of the reports you see come through now, we actually call it Dorset's natural environment, because we have such a beautiful area that we live in, and it is so natural. We've talked about the historic towns that we've got. I live in one where we've probably got the biggest high street of any of you, because we've got 3 shops in it. So the natural environment to me is very important. I had a meeting with Stephen Ford, the corporate director responsible for this morning, and I asked him to make sure that we push on the title, the Dorset National Environment, so we don't confuse people. We're no longer heading it up as a climate emergency, because that didn't win us too many friends in other areas, but everybody is interested in the environment. And Graham's quite right in highlighting the fact that we should push this pretty hard. So Stephen's taken it up to deal with the officers who are writing the reports to make sure that we get our wording right, so we don't confuse. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ray. Anyone else? Right, the recommendation's been approved and seconded. Any members disagree with the recommendation? In that case, in the absence of disagreement, the recommendations are approved. Now move on to agenda item 14. No, back on the agenda in line. Graham.
Look at that.
Thank you, Leader. Dorset Council's plan includes a commitment to work in partnership to tackle crime and antisocial behaviour. Working with its partners, the Council has done a huge amount of work to address problems like domestic abuse, sexual violence, violent crime and antisocial behaviour, all of which have a devastating impact on individuals and our communities. As you're aware, I chair the Dorset Community Safety Partnership, the CSP, which brings together partners including the police, probation,
health, fire and others to identify and tackle key community safety issues in the area. To date, we've helped put in place a wide variety of services to support victims of domestic abuse. We've established joint working arrangements that protect high-risk victims of domestic abuse. We supported programmes and initiatives aimed at addressing domestic abuse offending. We've run regular communications and awareness-raising campaigns relating to domestic abuse and sexual violence. These include running a campaign of posters on the side of our refuse lorries, which could be seen by people across the length and breadth of Dorset. We've undertaken training on a wide range of community safety issues across agencies, including domestic abuse, modern slavery, and preventing violent extremism. Training on modern slavery and prevent is now mandatory for all Dorset Council staff. We've completed and implemented recommendations from domestic homicide reviews. These are multi-agency reviews undertaken when a homicide or suicide is potentially related to domestic abuse. We've used a range of tools and initiatives to help tackle cases of antisocial behaviour, including issuing acceptable behaviour contracts, criminal behaviour orders and public space protection orders. We've put in place a wide variety of multi-agency initiatives aimed at addressing violent crime and sexual offences in the nighttime economy, including enforcement and public confidence. We've developed a dedicated multi-agency rural partnership coordinating group that develops joint work and initiatives to tackle rural crime. We've enhanced CCTV services to address stalking following a successful bid to the Home Office. We've worked with the housing associations to address concerns around antisocial behaviour, and more information and examples of the work completed are provided in the report sent out with today's papers. In the last few years, the Council has attracted over £1.8 million in additional government funding to help tackle key community safety issues, with further funding pledged for future years. I might add that total crime across the Dorset Council area has decreased over the past 6 years, and the efforts of the Council and its partners help ensure that Dorset still remains one of the safest areas in the county, in the country indeed. Chairman, we have a very small community safety partnership team. Andy Frost, Ian Grant, Di Evans, they do a fantastic job between them. And then we've got the doers out there doing the PCGs, the partnership coordinating groups, like John Newcomb and Steve Yeoman. I think all of those people need just a nod from us in this chamber to say thank you for a job well done. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Graham. And I think it places yet another emphasis on the importance of having some key priorities. We've got 10 key commitments from this Cabinet, and community safety is one of those. And thank you very much for your update. Move on to agenda item 15, which is portfolio holder updates and so on. I know colleagues have posted their updates, and those that haven't, please, can you do so? There's nothing specific to report, I don't think, and I'm not sure there's any referrals to overview on this particular occasion, so I will skip past that particular item. Item 16, urgent items, there aren't any. Item 17, exempt business, there isn't any, but it would be wrong for me to conclude the meeting without congratulating Claire Shields on the huge work she did as gold over the weekend in dealing with the situation in Poole Harbour. Great piece of work there, and also congratulations to our comms team for the support they gave in getting the message out so that the public had, as best as they could, at least in the early days, have a clear understanding about some of the implications of what had gone on and what the future ramifications might be for the environment. So thank you very much for that. At that point, I will draw the meeting to a close.